Hi, this is Wendy with WendySSEAs. Today, I want to talk to you about a handful of things, but we're going to look at how to distinguish captivating coral. Coral belong to a phylum, a group of organisms that include other specimens such as sea anemones, jellyfish, so many I almost can't name them all. So we're going to start with corals, and let's talk a little bit about why I'm doing this particular episode. I actually had a comment on my how to spot a sponge video that was like, duh, and I thought, let's make sure you understand my point. The reason that I wanted to do WendySSEAs is to help divers, lovers of the ocean, people who look into saltwater aquariums, not just see the big stuff. I'm guilty. I will go diving, and the first thing I'm looking for is something cool like a sea turtle or a shark or an octopus, but that's not what you get to see a lot of. You actually get to see a lot of the bottom of the ocean. And the bottom of the ocean looks different in different places. For example, if we were to go to a coral reef, you're going to see lots of sponges on the bottom of the ocean if you care to look, and they're beautiful. They come in lots of different colors, and who knew that sponges were animals, but they are. Corals are very similar. They also cover the bottom of the ocean, and they build mounds, especially the hard corals. And you will see things on these mounds under the ocean that also look like weeds. Look like weeds. They move with the current, and they look more like plants, but they're not. There's two groups of corals. There's hard corals and there's soft corals. So there's something I need to remind you of. One of those is our skeleton example. If an alien came to Earth and took one of these back to their home planet and said, hey everybody, this is what a human looks like, I want you to think about that a second. They're not really wrong. This is what we look like on the inside. But we all know that we look very different on the outside. Well, the same thing's true when you find things at the beach. Let's say you find a small piece of coral at the beach. That is actually not coral. It's coral skeleton, and that's very different. So what I do is I usually start off my lessons or I start off explaining corals this way. I have students take just a piece of clay. This is just kids clay from a set of clay, and we take a little pinch of clay and we make a little cup. I tell them they can just cover a finger, and the cup does not have to be beautiful. All right. I worked on this one a little bit longer, and you can see it's a little bit more cup shaped. But I have them make a cup, and then I have them start making some tentacles. And once they make their cup and their tentacles, I have them put the tentacles on the cup. And so when they're done, they have something that looks like this. Now this little cup with tentacles, looks like this, would be housed usually in a rock-like skeleton. And this rock-like skeleton is what you and I are familiar with as coral. Living coral is a little bit different. This is the actual coral polyp, the animal that lives inside that skeleton. My favorite example is this piece. This piece I've had since the 80s. It was part of a decoration for a saltwater aquarium. They now don't allow real coral in saltwater aquariums, but that's where most of this came from. I've been collecting for a long time. Let me get really close. I would like you to see if you can see the little holes, the little spots on here. Every single one of these holes, there's holes everywhere. They look like pinpricks. Every single one of these holes actually contains a tiny little coral polyp that looks like this. This is what makes corals so delicate. If you were to come along and step on the coral, you would actually squish it, kill it. And obviously, since these pinpricks are everywhere, if I were to step or crush this piece of coral, I've actually crushed tons of these polyps. So we want to make sure that we don't throw our anchors overboard into a coral reef. We don't want to touch, step, kick in any way, shape, or form if we can help it. We try not to touch coral because it is very delicate. It's also susceptible to heat, and we don't have a ton of control over the weather. But heat can actually kill corals. One of the things that people are trying to do today to kill, or not to kill corals, to save corals, is to try to grow corals in fish tanks. They're kind of big fish tanks. They're specialized fish tanks. It's called aquaculture. And they're trying to grow these corals and then replace them in the ocean in hopes that we can grow maybe some more heat-resistant corals, bacterial-resistant corals, things like that. So let me show you some of what I have here. These are coral skeletons from lots of different species of coral. Just like dogs have different breeds, corals have different species. I don't know the names of all of these, but they're absolutely beautiful. Just got back from Belize. They had a lot of this type of coral there. This one might be a little bit more familiar. This is called Staghorn Coral, and it's because it looks like the horns of a deer, a stag. They also have elkhorn coral, which is flatter. This is called star coral, and it's because these little holes here, they're called corallites. These little places that you see, these are more star shaped. This is mushroom coral, and it definitely looks a lot like a mushroom head. And then this is in the brain coral family. There's a handful of brain corals. Some of them are have more tight structures on the top here. And then I wanted to show you this one because I thought this was pretty cool. This is actually a, try to make sure you get a good look at it. This is actually fossilized coral. Found that in a gift shop and just had to have it so my students and you could see that this is unusual and unique, that something like this could actually fossilize. So let's get back to what our coral polyps do. Coral polyps are the actual animals. So coral is an animal and it leaves behind a skeleton, just like we're animals and we leave behind a skeleton. If you, and let me back up to, about half of corals are actually what they call hard corals and leave behind a calcium carbonate skeleton. Calcium carbonate's a lot like a Tums pill, chalk, something like that. These are pretty hard, and you will, if you feel them, they can cut you. They're pretty sharp as well. Most of them are pretty sturdy skeletons. Anyway, like I said, inside every one of these holes is one of these polyps. And what these tentacles do is they actually filter the water, and if they grab a hold of food, they will pull it into, so I'm going to put my tentacles up here, they will pull it into that oral opening, or that mouth at the top of the head right here, or at the top. So these tentacles would bend over and pull in that food into the coral animal, and that coral would digest it. Most corals, not all, most corals live in symbiosis with algae. The algae makes food for the coral as it's photosynthesizing, and then the coral is constantly bringing in nutrients from the water, and so it's a pretty good relationship there. If corals get in a bad situation in a bad environment, maybe the ocean's pH has gone up, so it's, or gone down, it's getting too acidic, the ocean gets too warm, the corals will expel that algae, and that's called coral bleaching. When corals bleach, what will eventually happen is the flesh that's left on these beautiful animals starts to decay. It will mold, and it almost looks like hairy, moldy stuff on there, and what's left is something like this. So when you see coral underwater that is very, very white, that's bleached coral. It's dead. It's not in good shape. What you hope to see are gorgeous colors and gorgeous corals under the ocean. ocean. A lot of that comes with what I call soft corals. But give me just a second to see really quickly. This is from a book called The World Beneath by Dr. Richard Smith. A student of mine actually gave this to me for an end of the year present. And this is a gorgeous picture of coral reef. This is what you think of, I would think, when I think of corals, I think of color. I don't think of this white skeleton. I think of all of this color under the ocean. Okay, we were talking about corals and the fact that these are considered hard corals and that there are more skeletons here than live corals. Live corals are going to have fleshy parts to them. One of the things that a lot of people need to realize is not only are corals very delicate and easy to squish, the tentacles of corals also have stinging cells. Now, these stinging cells may or may not affect humans. They mostly affect their prey. They are filter feeding for tiny little particles in the water, and they sting it and pull it in and digest it. Fire corals are one of the types of hard corals, or one of the types of corals that can sting an adult. But there's other types of corals as well. There's soft corals. Some that you may have seen, and this is rare. Most of your soft corals have nothing left behind, but this is a fan coral and another type of coral here. Guys, there's so many different shapes, sizes, types. I have a small guide over here that I printed just to work on my own understanding of the groups of corals, and its pages front and back. So you need to if you're interested in corals or something, you really want to know, hey, what's that type of coral? What's its name? You might want to just look that one up. It's a lot harder than I thought, but it's also lots of fun. So one of the places that you could go and see corals for sure would be a saltwater aquarium shop, somewhere where they sell saltwater fish and the other things that go in the aquarium. Aquaculture is huge right now, and that is a portion of aquaculture is actually growing corals in saltwater aquariums and selling them for profit. This is taking some pressure off of coral reef systems, because basically these pet shop owners or these saltwater aquarium owners are growing their own corals, not going out and taking corals from the ocean, but actually inbreeding and breeding corals and making very specialized corals. There's some really neat ones out there, like zoas. There are all sorts of types of corals that you can purchase for a saltwater aquarium, and it's a lot of fun to start to recognize the different types and how you can cut them in half and make more for your own tank, or to sell, or to trade. That's a whole nother discussion. What I wanted to one of the other things I wanted to talk about was some of the relatives of corals. We've got hard corals and soft corals, but we also have some neat little things. You may have noticed that this little polyp that I showed you, the actual coral animal, looks a lot like something very, very similar. And what I did was I just took some clay and made a bigger one. You may have seen some of these at, again, a pet shop, an aquarium. But sea anemones and corals are closely related. The sea anemone is like an extra huge coral polyp. Instead of being stuck to the bottom of the ocean like the coral is, sea anemones can attach to rocks, whatever's on the bottom of the ocean, but they can also release, and they basically do some cartwheels and some rolling, and they can reattach on another piece of coral or another bottom feature. The other one that's really interesting, I don't know if you noticed or not, but if I turn this upside down, this looks a little familiar. Corals are also related to jellyfish. So all tentacles of corals, sea anemones, and jellyfish have the ability to sting. Every cell on there is covered in something called a nematocyst, a stinging cell. And if you've got a jellyfish stinging story, you've got a good one. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts. But jellyfish are amazing too. Lots of neat colors and differences there too. There's two forms of cnidarian, or in this group, they're the ones with the tentacles that are up here. These are usually called polyp form, and they tend to be stuck to the bottom or attached in some way. The ones that have the tentacles hanging down, those are going to be in your jellyfish crowd. There are colonial organisms. For example, corals live in all of these little holes, so they're considered colonies. A jellyfish is usually not considered a colony, but a Portuguese man of war, which is a very nasty type of jellyfish, is actually considered a colonial organism. So there's so many different little things to know about this group, and they're fascinating. I highly recommend taking a course through your local dive shop. I dive with Watery Dive Center in Columbia, South Carolina, and it's an SSI, or a Scuba Schools International dive shop. And so that particular program on coral identification can be taken online, but other certification agencies offer courses as well. You can also find great books like The World Beneath by Dr. Richard Smith that have lots of information about different types of corals and things that you might see under the ocean. I've marked a few things, like this would be a soft coral here. This is an anemone tentacles. You often see anemones with clownfish in them. That's in the Pacific Ocean. In the Pacific Ocean, you will see clownfish and sea anemones. In the Atlantic Ocean or the Caribbean, over this way by me, there are mostly damselfish, which are not clownfish. It's the same family, but a little bit, not the orange and white ones. They tend to have different colors, but they live in the sea anemones. Let's see what else I have here. More pictures of soft corals. You'll notice a lot of different colorations there, or different colors. This is a good plate coral. And then finally, really good jellyfish here. And I tried to print out a few things to show you, and they just didn't print very well. This would be a sea anemone here. Another sea anemone. These are some jellyfish. They were floating and lighted, actually lit by different colored lights. So most of your jellyfish tend to be clear, that just depends. This is a cannonball jellyfish. This is very common on the South Carolina coast. We'll see these washed up a good bit. But like I said, they have the stinging cells. If you want to know more, your local dive shop, possibly a local zoo. Many zoos have aquariums where you can go and look for sponges, look for corals, on top of enjoying those other beautiful fish that they have in the tanks. Also, saltwater aquarium stores often have a good many of these animals that you can go see. You will be shocked at how bioluminescent some of them are, the variations of colors, just some amazing animals. Let's take a look at some of the pictures that I've taken of corals from Bonaire, Belize, Grand Turk. I hope you enjoy this next section. See if you can find some captivating corals in these pictures.